Rome didn't build an empire on courage alone. It built it on debt. We love to picture Roman legions as unstoppable warriors, driven by honor and discipline. But behind every polished helmet and sharpened gladius was a massive supply system and an enormous bill. Soldiers needed food, weapons, roads, and pay. Horses needed feed. Siege engines needed timber and labor. None of this was free. It took money, a lot of it. So how did Rome finance centuries of conquest? And why does it still matter? Because the deeper you look at Rome's war machine, the clearer one thing becomes. War wasn't just fought on the battlefield. It was built into the financial system. And once that system started moving, it couldn't stop. Expansion stopped being a choice. It became an economic necessity. Let's rewind. In the early Republic, Rome's army was made up of citizens. If you owned land, you could be called to fight. You brought your own gear and expected to return home after the campaign. But as Rome expanded, wars dragged on longer and pushed farther from home. That old setup broke down fast. You couldn't just leave your farm for years at a time. Rome needed professional soldiers, so the state stepped in and began paying them. Not generously, but enough to keep them loyal. Then came the real shift. Conquest itself turned into a revenue model. Every new province brought taxes, slaves, gold, and tribute. War paid for more war. The system fed itself. But here's where things got dangerous. Rome didn't rely only on taxes. It relied heavily on borrowing. During long, expensive conflicts like the Punic Wars against Carthage, the Republic took huge public loans from wealthy elites, the equites, Rome's rising financial class. These weren't patriotic gifts. They were investments. And investors expected returns, interest payments, tax farming rights, and exclusive business access in conquered territories. War became a business. And the more profitable it was, the more of it Rome needed. Over time, this war-driven economy reshaped everything. Political power shifted toward generals who could promise spoils. Senators became shareholders in violence. Private contractors, the publicani, handled logistics and tax collection, skimming fortunes along the way. It was military-industrial capitalism in a toga. The costs kept rising. To pay soldiers and creditors, the state needed constant new revenue. When expansion slowed or rebellions drained the treasury, Rome turned to a familiar trick: debasing the currency. Starting under Nero, the silver content of the denarius was quietly reduced. Over the next 2 centuries, emperors diluted it again and again, turning a solid silver coin into a promise backed by almost nothing. Inflation followed. Trust disappeared. By the 3rd century, Rome's monetary system was in free fall. And as always, the burden wasn't shared equally. The wealthy protected themselves with land, slaves, and foreign assets. Ordinary people paid through higher taxes, weaker money, forced labor, and conscription. Public services collapsed. Corruption exploded. This wasn't just a military breakdown. It was a financial one. Now pause and look around. Governments running massive deficits. Wars funded by borrowing. Central banks quietly weakening currencies to cover the gap. A financial class getting rich from defense contracts and crisis profits. An economy where expansion, military, monetary, or market-based is the only way to keep things from breaking. It's not a perfect parallel, but the DNA is uncomfortably familiar. Rome shows us what happens when an economy is built on endless expansion. Eventually, you run out of land, resources, or enemies. The debt remains, the expectations remain, but the income dries up. That's when the state turns inward: higher taxes, weaker money, tighter control. Bread and circuses for the masses. Fortified villas for the elite. We don't call it tribute today. We call it taxation, quantitative easing, or monetary policy. But the mechanics haven't changed much. Governments spend more than they earn. Central banks print to fill the gap. The rich buy assets. Everyone else pays higher prices. Wars are still financed with debt. Trillions spent. Interest earned. The bill passed on through inflation. Reduced services. And instability. You already know who benefits and who pays. And like in Rome, the cycle feeds itself. Debt becomes normal. Emergency measures become routine. You don't print money to solve a crisis anymore. You print it to avoid collapse. And you pretend it's fine until it isn't. That's why economic history matters. These aren't dusty stories, they're warning signs. Rome outsourced too much power to private finance, hollowed out its currency, and trapped itself in obligations it couldn't escape. Not because it was evil, but because the system had no off switch. Today's empire looks different. It's digital, global, powered by capital flows instead of legions. But the rules are the same. Money and power move together. War is profitable. Inflation hits the weakest first, and financial illusions work until they don't. You can't fully opt out of the system, but you can understand it. You can stop playing blind. You can study financial history, not just personal finance. You can watch incentives, not just headlines. And you can ask one simple question. Who benefits when I don't understand what's happening? Because you weren't meant to ask how Rome paid for its wars, or how modern states do it today. You were meant to watch the spectacle, not the mechanics. But now you've seen the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If this gave you a new perspective, like the video and subscribe.